When that young man asked Cassie if she believed in God, she boldly said yes, and he shot and killed her.
We looked at each other and we said, would I have done that? I might have begged for my life. But she didn't. She may have been 17, but she's probably a better woman than I will ever be.
Had you been the only one, so don't you ever doubt. No, it's true.
Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. This is Fundy Fridays and I am Jen, and here on my channel I talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism while making myself look stupid for your entertainment. And today I just want to give a heads up. We are talking about Columbine, one of the most infamous and violent school shootings in modern history, so viewer discretion is advised. And I'll tell you right now, I'm giving myself an authentic 2007 emo makeover, and we'll get to why later in the video. I don't even know. I don't need to do eyebrows. So. Specifically in this episode today, we are going to be talking about the story and the surrounding mythos of the deaths of both Cassie Bernall and Rachel Scott. Both of these girls were students at Columbine High School and were victims of the well-known shooting that occurred there. Both of their deaths have been exploited by the evangelical community as a means to create modern martyrs, say that 3 times fast, that the youth of the time could relate to. The reason I'm calling this version of events a legend is because the story that we were told is not true. In fact, the circumstances of Cassie's death in particular have become such a ubiquitous / pervasive event in our culture that I probably don't even need to tell you the story. Except in order to cut to the heart of what really happened, I do need to peer into the abyss, and I'm asking you to come with me. Also, if this was a completely authentic tutorial, I would have burned the tip of this, but back then we were using 99-cent pencils and this was $15, so I'm not gonna do that. I didn't intend the eyeshadow to look like this, but I think it fits because I, for one, definitely did not blend my eyeshadow back then, so it would have looked like this. April 20th, 1999. The 2 gunmen entered the school around lunchtime, moving through the school without a discernible pattern or plan. Originally, they had planned the event to be a bombing, but when their bombs didn't go off, they were like, fuck it, we've got guns, let's use them. And at the end of all of it, the 2 of them took their lives in the library, and the rest is history. Beyond the deaths, dozens of people were wounded, and hundreds, if not more, were traumatized by the event. Many people identify Columbine as being the first school shooting with major live media coverage, and they like to point it out as the beginning of the modern American relationship with the concept of the school shooting and the school shooter. There is security footage of the event, along with basement tapes, Tumblrs, Instagram pages, blogs, books, documentaries, songs, movies. If you want to know more about Columbine, a cornucopia of morbid knowledge is just a Google search away. But that's not what this episode is about. It's important to note just how much tertiary information there was about this case. One can legitimately come up with hundreds of different conclusions about what happened at Columbine. All of this notoriety and complex background information has led to the development of an industry of myths surrounding the events of Columbine. The motivations of the shooters, the reactions of the students, and the lessons to be learned have all been picked apart and obsessed over by a traumatized population. I want to note that this is not an inherently bad thing. Yes, I'm putting concealer all over my face as if it's foundation. In the wake of a preventable tragedy, a responsible society should look to debrief and try to find the lessons that can be learned to prevent such things in the future. But in Columbine, many individuals have found fertile ground to advance their own agendas and to line their pockets. It's almost as if there's not enough in here to cover your full face and you shouldn't use it as foundation. I'll disregard that information. This is where I want to give a shout out to Caitlin Doty of Ask a Mortician, because she did a really good episode dispelling some of the myths in Columbine, including these. Probably the most common myths about the situation. For instance, the killers have commonly been painted as bullied, antisocial gamers who were driven to violence by their treatment at the hands of fellow students and who used the motivations of video games and violent movies to inspire their rampage. We've also been led to believe that they targeted specific types of students, such as black people, jocks, and Christians. In reality, no one has been able to demonstrate a consistent thread of commonality between the victims and the killings, and they seem to be primarily based on convenience for the killers in relation to where they were in the building. We do know that Dylan and Eric were kind of racist and possibly white supremacist, but they were trying to kill the most number of people regardless of their background, and all evidence points to those that died simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In fact, a lot of parents had actually complained about Nolan and Eric beforehand, and they both had been arrested prior to this, but the police covered it up during the investigation. I am living for this. I'm not gonna lie. We should bring this back! What happened? The truth of the matter is they were both deeply troubled teenagers in America, and you know how it is here. Mental health care is not even a thing, and guns are more plentiful than corn. And also like the killers, the lives and motivations of those students whose lives were cut short have also proved to be ripe for scrutiny, interpretation, and exploitation. The story of Cassie is usually presented alongside the story of Rachel Scott. They're both often listed as people who said yes. The story that Rachel's parents are telling us is that one of the shooters asked her if she still believed in God and shot her, and then her last words being some sort of affirmative statement of her faith. I've heard particularly, "You know it," is what she said. And for the record, there's no evidence that this conversation ever occurred with anyone. Personally, I think the debate surrounding this conversation has pulled attention away from the real tragedy of Columbine, which is all the untimely deaths and the horrible trauma that they all had to go through, and the shadow that hangs over the school to this day. Rachel's unfortunate death was dramatized in the 2016 Pureflix movie, I'm Not Ashamed.
Well, Rachel, where's your God now?
What would Jesus do?
Do you still believe in God?
You know I do.
Then go be with him.
This movie is supposedly based on journal entries from Rachel and features Sadie Robertson of Duck Dynasty fame as a supporting character. However, those in the know, like myself, probably recognize her from Lawson Bates' music video.
And we were both better off taking different paths. I know it might be true, but my heart won't let me pass the past.
I hate this movie as I believe it only exists to callously exploit the tragedy of Columbine as a means to advance the agenda of evangelical Christianity. It has not only trivialized Rachel's death, and the tone was flippant and one-dimensional to such a degree that I find it irresponsible. To prove my point, I have been able to legitimately take scenes from this movie and crank out a teen comedy.
It was just another day at Columbine.
Just another day at Columbine.
Will Rachel find a date for prom?
He told me that he's gonna be at Chuck's party tomorrow.
Columbine High.
And since this is a movie that is produced by Pureflix, they had to shoehorn in some evil atheist tropes with scenes like this that definitely, totally, probably happened.
I didn't stop your stupid Jesus speech.
You think you're better than us?
No, I'm not better than anybody.
Oh, I know you're not.
I gotta get to class.
You're just like all the others.
Scott's parents have also cashed in on their child's death by writing these books. Rachel's Tears, Rachel Smiles, The Spiritual Legacy of Columbine Martyr Rachel Scott. They're not all bad. I do like this quote attributed to Rachel Scott's dad.
It was never a major issue for me whether Rachel said she believed in God. Her life was ample proof of that. What she did in her diaries and preceding her death is more important than the last word she may have spoken.
And now for Cassie Bernal's story. It has been reported that Cassie experienced a troubled upbringing and became a born-again Christian as a teenager. This is the story that her parents are telling, and while it ultimately has no bearing on her death and the subsequent mythos surrounding it, I feel it's an important piece of context for understanding how her death is currently perceived. For those who have not heard, the story is as follows. Eric Harris approached Cassie and asked directly if she believed in God. Cassie said yes, with the knowledge that the answer would likely lead to her death. By answering yes, Cassie accepted her death as a consequence of affirming her faith. The reason why this story circulated first was that Craig Scott, the brother of Rachel Scott, was in the library, and he heard someone being asked the famous question and answering yes. It turns out that the student who actually said yes was Valine Schnurr, who we will address later. Of note, Craig actually saved another student's life. I think that is a true story that we should tell more often. The grim reality of what happened to Cassie is that she was hiding under a library table. Eric Harris said peekaboo, smacked the table, and then shot her. But that's not an inspiring story and probably won't sell nearly as many books, though it appears to have been scrapped in favor of a more marketable retelling. But once the eponymous book She Said Yes came out and this new version of Cassie's story reached the public consciousness, it took on a life of its own. Adults and kids who heard this version of the story with no further context were awed and inspired by Cassie's Cassie's courageous declaration of faith. For many of the time, she became an important role model in how seriously one should affirm and live their faith. So She Said Yes would quickly develop into a very popular piece of young adult literature. And I asked you on Instagram if you've ever read it or if it was popular in your group, and I had no idea just how big of a deal it was. And I even bought a copy on Thrift Books, not an ad. I'd love to be sponsored by Sorry, no free advertisements, honey. I did only read bits and pieces of it. I don't hate myself that much. Some parts that really bothered me was how many times not only her parents, but friends of Cassie said she wouldn't have wanted to be a martyr. And they'll even say, I don't consider her a martyr. And then like 2 sentences later, they'll talk about how she was a martyr. So that made me really uncomfortable. There's also this line at the end. If there is anything I would like to leave you, the reader, it is the same thought. Cassie's story is not only mine and Brad's, it is yours. And what you do with it now will give it meaning. No, I don't think it's anybody else's story, and I think it's really inappropriate that you wrote this book, so, let's move on. This story of Cassie's death would go on to be immortalized in pop culture and in many more Christian songs, movies, and writings. My favorite piece of Cassie iconography is the song Cassie by Flyleaf. I'm obsessed with that song. It is, in fact, the entire reason that I made this episode, and it is the reason why I'm giving myself an emo makeover.
In order to save her life, I get the answer no to avoid death. The answer yes would make it to believe in God, written on the bullet, and Cassie pulled the trigger.
Lacey Sturm, maiden name Mosley, the singer of Flyleaf, actually left the band to begin a more Christian-centered music career with Billy Graham. She has recently made a return to the hard rock genre with her new band, Lacey. She's still a Christian, and Lacey herself has had a very tough life, so it's worth looking into. I will say that if you like old Flyleaf, then you'll probably really like her new band. Michael W. Smith wrote a song about Cassie, and in the music video, he placed this clip that makes me feel very uncomfortable.
I think that the way I'm advancing the kingdom is just being a loyal friend and a good example to non-believers and also Christians. Just trying to not contradict myself and get rid of all hypocrisy and just to live for Christ.
The song itself is also really terrible, and I can't help but think that he looks like he's trying to be Rob Thomas.
It was a test we could all hope to pass, but none of us would want to take. Faced with a choice to deny God and live. For her there was one choice to make.
And we mustn't forget that he wrote the afterword to She Said Yes. The fact that thousands, potentially millions of youth were being forced to think about being in this same situation and what they would do is something I would personally describe as mass conditioning towards martyrdom. Kids being assigned to read this book by their parents, pastors, youth groups, or religious schools were taught that Cassie's actions as portrayed in the book are the ones that they should plan to take in similar settings. They are being taught to accept that a positive affirmation of faith is important even in situations where you could die. And it is my opinion that that is a form of radicalization. This propaganda does not need to exist, and you can be a good Christian without having to do what she did, or didn't do. Yeah. So now that I've spent all this time covering what didn't happen, it's probably good for us to discuss what actually did. Valene Schnurr was one of the girls who actually said yes, and she's alive to tell the tale. The problem was that no one believed her when she told her story because Cassie's parents had already gone on a book tour, and because the truth just wasn't as #inspirational as the Bernal family headcanon. At some point, Schnurr looked up and saw boots first and then a shotgun. She was whispering prayers when the first blast hit her and knocked her to the floor. Bleeding, she whispered more loudly, oh my God, don't let me die.
You believe in God?
One of the shooters asked. Yes.
Why?
Because I believe, and my parents brought me up that way, she answered, and crawled away while he reloaded. He didn't shoot at her again. It didn't really cross my mind that something bad would happen from my answer, she says now. He asked, and I couldn't say no. I didn't think of it as bravery. I think of it as what I said because it's true. Because it's just me. What else was I going to say? If the truth had been known early on, the legend could have been different. It could have been told that a fearless girl, crouched and bleeding, spoke the name of Jesus and lived. She summoned God to shield her from Satan's henchmen. But the truth wasn't known, and now that it is, it barely reverberates. Even so, why does it matter? In questions of death and faith, it's the power of the story that counts, the tale that helps the mind grasp the unfathomable. Compared with that comfort, the truth is a trifle. So now the question becomes, why would they make this up in the first place? People want this story to be true, and I can see why. Simply put, it is fantastic propaganda. You couldn't make this shit up. Well, I mean, they did make it up. You will never change the story of Cassie, says Dave McPherson, the pastor at the Bernals Church. Cassie will always say yes. Period. Mass shootings are contagious, and we have the research to back it up. And given what we've seen, it's not a far jump to assume that martyrdom is just as contagious, and it spreads in the exact same way. In the months that followed Columbine, many teenagers professed a Christ-sanctioned death wish. Books and songs about Cassie Bernall and Rachel Scott circulated widely, especially among teenagers in suburban churches. They prompted not just teenage soul-searching, but also that other teenage phenomenon, aspiration. A teenager named Tina told a Southern Baptist news service that God has laid it on my heart that I'm going to be martyred. When I told one of my friends, he said, "That's awesome. I wish it could happen to me." Teens were supposed to be sold out for Jesus, and anything less and you were a bad Christian. In the 90s and early 2000s was a pretty formative time for a lot of millennial Christians. I Kiss Dating Goodbye came out. There was all kinds of popular Christian bands, especially DC Talk, who wrote a book called Jesus Freaks that talked about martyrs such as Cassie. The idea of being Christian was turned from being, I guess, pious and lame to being cool and radical and countercultural. And we see this kind of language reflected in Girl Defined, who say things about God's radical design for femininity. Obviously, there's been a lot of copycat killers, and that's actually called the Columbine effect. And there's a whole page on Wikipedia that shows you how many people were inspired by these two. And that's not the only thing that we're still seeing 20 years later. In 2015, Rick Santorum talked about Cassie and used her as an example.
16 years ago, this country was tremendously inspired by a young woman who faced a gunman at Columbine, was challenged about her faith, and she refused to deny God. We saw her as a hero, but today, someone who defies a judge's unconstitutional verdict is ridiculed, chastised, because she's standing up and not denying her God and her faith.
The tragically intertwined stories of Cassie, Rachel, and Columbine can teach us all a great deal about the power of a narrative. Columbine was, and at the time it occurred, a truly novel kind of trauma for the United States. Guns had already been in schools, and we have already had school shootings, but for the first time, the nation was forced to watch the event live on screen, and later, as the footage was replayed, dissected, and scrutinized over and over. To borrow a bit from Jungian psychology, this violent and graphic event became part of the greater American collective unconscious. Our nation struggled to process the trauma of what we had seen, and the subsequent scramble for answers opened up opportunities for those with agendas to push. The stories of Cassie and Rachel were two such examples of agendas advanced through the exploitation of the Columbine tragedy. At this point, I want to express that I sympathize with grieving parents who simply want to remember their daughter in the best light following her tragic death. But stories of faith in the face of certain death at the hands of violent atheists were valuable to the burgeoning rebel Christianity narrative that had already been sprouting up at the time. Instead, they're using the verifiably false legends that surround their deaths of two teenage girls to let the next generation of Christian kids know that they need to be ready and willing to die for their faith at any time. In death, they are being forced to act as role models for a cause that no one can truly verify their faith in. This sure was a fun episode to film, but it was not a fun episode to research. Have you read this book? Have you watched I'm Not Ashamed? Was this a subject that came up in your youth groups? Did you ever go to any of these cool Christian rock concerts? How has Cassie's story affected you? I mean, as we can see in this book, that was kind of the point, is for everyone to ask themselves, would they say yes? Several times in the book and in interviews, the mom talks about how her daughter is a better Christian than she was. You know, it's just really, I don't like it. Definitely rest in peace to Cassie, Rachel, and all of those who died because of Columbine, and especially the secondary deaths, because there were people who weren't doing too well after, and this whole thing is just really fucked up and terrible and sad. And I did only write the episode because I wanted to learn more about the song, and now I'm depressed. So look up Columbine unless you really want to be sad. If your child is obsessed with Columbine, I would check in on them, because a lot of times it's not just girls, but mostly it's teenage girls that become obsessed with these two. It's not because they want to kill others, it's because maybe they want to hurt themselves. So That's my only advice on that subject. If you like this video, remember to consensually smash that like and subscribe button. Hit the bell if you'd like to be notified when I upload new content, because sometimes it's early in the morning, sometimes it's in the afternoon. I have merch, including this new tote bag, Picnics Are My Love Language, which is a reference to the Plath 2 video, and you can put your food and your baguettes and your drinks in there. You can have a picnic in the picnic bag. It's great. I have all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. There is a Discord link is on my Instagram. I want you to know that I love all of you very, very much. Ramadan Mubarak, Shalom, and have a very blessed day.
You'll pull the trigger.